Hi, my name is John Dwyer. I am the host of New Hope Celebrates History LGBTQ+, Authors and Artists Series. Thank you for joining us today. Last year we had a wonderful first season. This year we're going to have another one. I'm going to now introduce you to Jobert Abueva. Mr. Abueva is a personal friend of mine. He was involved with the Pete Buttigieg campaign, which I was involved with, and he's also a noted author. Let me tell you something about him. Let me tell you about where he's been featured. He's been featured in the New York Times. He's been featured in the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's been featured in the Bucks Courier Times. He's been featured in the Bucks County Herald. He's been featured in Fortune magazine. He's quite well noted and has won several prizes and scholarships throughout his years. And you're going to be hearing from him shortly. I do want to ask you a special favor though. If you enjoy this series, as I know that you do, I want you to put your hands in your pockets and maybe help us a little bit, because this is very important. If there's something that's important about us in the gay world, LGBTQ plus world, it's we need to know where we've been, so we need to know in order to know where we're going. It's so important to recognize our history, and now is a time for us to tell our stories, the ones that we're proud of, the ones that we have created for ourselves. But with no further ado, let me introduce you to now Jobert Abueva.
Hi, I'm Jobert Abueva. I now live here in New Hope and Solebury Township, Pennsylvania. Very nice to be with you. I was born in Manila, the Philippines in 1964 to an assistant professor of public administration at the University of the Philippines, Dr. Jose Veloso Abueva, who set eyes on a co-ed, Maria Socorro Encarnacion. Together, they were known as Pepe and Corain, and they had 4 children. I am the second. It goes girl, boy, girl, boy. By the time I was 3, I had already lived in Honolulu and Brooklyn, where my father was a visiting professor at CUNY, the City University of New York. I remember my earliest days were in Flatbush at our apartment, where I used to fly my DC-6 model airplane that Santa Claus left me for Christmas. I would pretend to fly it through the kitchen, into the bedrooms, and underneath my father's desk. And unfortunately, one day, I had an accident and rammed the airplane into my eye. And so I had to have several stitches on an already very weak eye, and kind of left me as a cyclops. So that was unfortunate. And years later, my mom brought me to a faith healer, hoping that he could cure me of my vision problems. We visited the faith healer 3 times to no avail, and let's just say it was a case of blind faith. I attended 1st to 3rd grade at Ateneo de Manila, which was run by the Jesuits. My parents were devout Catholics, so we read the Bible and went to Mass every Sunday. I also loved spending time in the library. You could not keep me away from the library and borrowing books and bringing them home by the dozen. In fact, for a couple of years, I was awarded an outstanding library citizen. If you look really closely at my report cards or any document in the day, my actual name then was Jose Egbert, not Jobert. And the quick story is that before I was born, my father had a very good friend from Eugene, Oregon, who was a visiting professor at the University of the Philippines named Egbert Wengert. And he was dying of cancer, and my father called up Egbert's son and said, if we have a boy, we'll name him Egbert. And a week later they did. So I was known as Egbert, but I couldn't take the teasing back at school. So I came home crying to my parents and said, I want to change my name. And they said, okay, let's do that. And from there on out, I was known as Jobert. In 1972, Ferdinand Marcos dictated martial law. And my father, who was secretary of the Constitutional Convention, along with other senators, had to go into hiding. And so we did not know where my father was for quite a long period. But not before long, we found him surfacing in Kathmandu, Nepal. So in 1974, we, the family, followed him to Kathmandu. And that was a wonderful time when I went to the British primary school. We also had the chance to visit India a lot. I remember a wonderful trip when we went to Calcutta, New Delhi, Agra to see the Taj Mahal, Khajuraho, and Varanasi. It was a wonderful time where there was no television or radio. However, we were quite fortunate because we had access to the American Club of Kathmandu. And that's where I got to watch several movie classics. I was age 10, and that's the first time I actually saw Soylent Green, Barefoot in the Park, Barbarella, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. After Kathmandu in 1975, my father was transferred to Bangkok, Thailand. There, I returned to Catholic instruction, went to Ramrudi International School. My favorite subject was English. We returned to Manila in 1976. The Philippines was still under martial law, but it was safer for my family to return. Because we were off schedule to the Filipino curriculum, I had to attend international school in Manila. And this was also the time when I got my first job ever. I was a broadcaster. I actually was a co-anchor on Newswatch Junior Edition, which ran on the weekends. And funny enough, I got all the political stories that were pro-Marcos. And it had to do with the fact that my father was a politico who was, in a way, anti-Marcos. But I guess that was the price of being on the air, which I really did enjoy because I got to meet celebrities, I got to interview them. I also got to learn a lot about different pastimes when I interviewed people who would collect stamps or do some interesting things. So it was a wonderful time. In a funny way, I enjoyed being a small C celebrity, signing autographs. And we even won a Filipino Emmy. Then came 1977 when my father took an assignment with the United Nations University in Tokyo, Japan. And wouldn't you know it, we, the whole family, followed him to Tokyo. I attended St. Mary's International School. It was an all-boys school run by the Brothers of Christian Instruction in Montreal, Quebec. And that's where I studied Japanese, where I made a lot of friends from all over the world. And I was what you would call a BMOC, a big man on campus. I wanted to do everything. I did everything from Brain Bowl to speech competitions to debate, working on the yearbook, on what the Diplomat, that's what our newspaper was called. I ran track and field. I was on the student council. I even was the vice president and president of the student council. I did it all. But during my time there, I also enjoyed being a teenager. I was a huge fan of the Tokyo Yomiuri Giants baseball team, and I was really into Japanese pop music. I remember my father was such a prolific writer. He wrote presidential biographies. He wrote a lot about his discipline, which was public administration and political science. So he was always in his house library, home library, and he would encourage us children to write. I wanted to make him proud, so he would say, "So why don't you write something?" And he would give me this yellow pad paper and pencils, and I found myself writing a lot of poetry, and I even talk about it in my memoir. I also recall I had a crush. I was in second or third grade, and I had a crush on this boy who was probably fourth or fifth grade. And I was so enamored with him that he caused me to write a book about him. So I wrote about him living in New York with his family, and my mother even shared it with a friend of hers who was an editor-publisher. But unfortunately, the editor-publisher friend said, "This story is too American. It won't do for a Filipino audience." Throughout all my years, I loved writing for the school newspaper, even as early as third grade. I remember my stories were always front page of the Ateneo, the Blue Horn. That's what the newspaper was called. And even if my school did not have a newspaper, I would create my own newspaper and name myself editor. After graduating from high school in 1982, I landed at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I took my father's advice and studied economics, but my interest in Asian studies led me to my double major. I did everything when I was at the University of Michigan. I was an orientation leader. I worked in the career planning and placement office. I even was a resident advisor. In fact, I was the resident advisor for the men's swimming and gymnastics teams. It was kind of easy because their coaches said, "Jobert, if any of the boys cause you trouble, just call us." They had curfews that started at 10 p.m. and they had to get up at 4 a.m. So in a way, my job was really easy. In my final year, I actually went off campus and lived with the swim team. I even served as sort of the mascot of the swim team and made many friends there. Upon graduating in 1986, I took on my first job at the May department stores, the May company in Cleveland. They were the only ones who were willing to hire an international student at the time, so that's how I ended up in retail. I lived right on Lake Erie. I was kind of miserable my first 6 months because I did not know anyone, but soon enough I found my friends and had a wonderful 2.5 years in Cleveland. From there, I moved on to New York City. I took a job with Macy's at Herald Square. I was in the buying office for men's sport coats and dress trousers. It was about this time that I also got my green card, which saved me from having to marry someone in order to stay in the United States. In 1990, I decided to go back to graduate school, and I attended Columbia Business School in Manhattan. I studied marketing. So what happened when I was there? I took an internship with Procter & Gamble, actually their Norwich Eaton pharmaceutical division in upstate New York. I won an essay competition that was sponsored by Fortune magazine and Air France. I wrote on the topic of how do you measure customer service. And the best part wasn't seeing myself in print. It was actually an all expenses paid trip to Paris, which was wonderful. In 1992, I graduated from Columbia and I had many offers. I was very fortunate that way. But I decided to join Clairol, which was a division of Bristol-Myers Squibb in Manhattan. Yes, Clairol. We're talking about hair color and shampoos. One of my first assignments was nice and easy hair color. I also worked on a leave-in treatment called Infusing 23. One of the perks of working at Clairol is that I would attend the Miss America pageant every year as a sponsor. And I would go down to Atlantic City, and one of the first things you do with the new Miss America is have a picture with her. She's not even Miss America for an hour and she's already taking pictures with sponsors. So that was kind of funny. My career soon turned global. Clairol sent me to Europe. I was based in the UK and my job was to open up the Central and Eastern European markets. And that would include Russia, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and that also included Turkey and Israel. I probably sat on more than 500 focus groups where I had to learn more than any other man had to about women's hair care habits. From there, I was shipped over to Guangzhou, China to replicate the model for selling Clairol. I was there for about 9 months, and then I was shipped back to London for a while, and I ended up in Bangkok, where I headed up Asia Pacific marketing for Clairol. By around 1998, I had already been on the road for quite a few years, jumping from country to country. And to be honest with you, I kind of burnt out. And so I decided to head back to New York, where I spent a little more time at Clairol, but then I decided to quit corporate America and just decided to take writing classes. I took writing classes at this new school in Manhattan, and I even joined the Gotham Writers Workshop. It was about that time that I thought, why don't I start submitting essays to different publications? So I did submit a business essay to the New York Times. It was for a column called My Money, My Life. And this was the time of the big .com era. And I wrote about how a lot of folks were leaving their corporate jobs to join all these amazing startups, and that I myself was thinking about doing the same thing. And from there, the editors at the New York Times asked me if I wanted to pitch stories. And I said, sure, why not? And so I did. And in fact, I would like to kind of remember what some of those stories were about. So I'm going to let you in on a little secret about the different feature articles that you might be reading in the newspaper. Truth of the matter is, I pitched stories that I was interested in myself reporting. And I'm just looking through some of my articles for the New York Times in my scrapbook here. One of the very first stories I wrote about was feng shui in the office place. The title is Harmony and Bottom Line. I also wrote about betting pools during March Madness. I wrote a feature article that was on the front page of the business section one year called Return of the Native Executive. And this was about executives returning back after assignments overseas, which is actually my own personal story. And I wanted to write about all the emotions and issues that come along with losing an employee after they had worked abroad. I also wrote a lot of first-person accounts for a column called The Boss. And I wrote about their experiences, how they got into their current positions. Some of the folks I wrote about included, I don't know if you know who Gelman is. He's the producer-director of Live with, at the time, it was Live with Regis and Kathy Lee. And so I wrote about him. I wrote about a lot of CEOs of different ad agencies and different businesses. Oh my goodness. One of the CEOs I wrote about, I had pitched Donald J. Trump, editor, once. And he said, sure, go ahead. And I called the Trump organization and spoke to their VP of Media Relations, and she said, yeah, come on down right now. I said, now? Yeah. So in 2 hours from my apartment in the Village, I went up to Trump Tower, and I was escorted up to this office where it was just his secretary and himself. But before I met Mr. Trump, the VP of Media Relations said, I only have one favor to ask of you. Please do not shake Mr. Trump's hand because he's a germaphobe. I said, fine, no problem. I meet Mr. Trump and he says to me, who are you with? And I said, the New York Times. The New York Times, so nice to meet you. Let's just say the interview went on and on and on. He's very good about talking about himself. And it was probably a good 3-4 hours, and I was nodding and taking several notes. So I wrote the article and I submitted it to my editor, and my editor said, Jobert, we can't publish this. I said, why not? He hasn't told you anything new and different. I said, darn it, I knew it. So I called the VP of Media Relations and told her, I'm sorry, it's a no-go, we can't publish this. Wouldn't you know it, after that call, not even a minute, my phone rings. Jobert, it's Donald. How do we get this published? I want to be in the New York Times. I said, Mr. Trump, you got to give me something new and different. So he gave me the story about a friend of his that killed a swan on one of the golf courses, and that the organization PETA was all over the friend. I said, fine, give that to me. So I included this in the story, and it got published. So it's not one of my most happy moments, shall we say, to be doing this. But if you type Donald J. Trump and my name next to each other and Google it, let me tell you, the story is there. In fact, I don't know why I kept this, but I have this letter signed by Donald J. Trump with embossed the Trump Organization logo, where he profusely thanks me for publishing the story about him. He said, I thought it was terrific, and so did everyone else, judging from the feedback I have received. You're welcome, Mr. Trump. I met my now ex-partner Bruce. He and I were actually together in business school, but when I came back to New York, we reconnected, and we were both corporate refugees. We decided that we probably needed a change of pace, but part of the truth was our apartment rental was going up by a significant amount, and we thought we could probably get a mortgage with this. So we actually saw a picture of a kitchen in a log cabin. It was in a Lisa James Auto real estate ad in the New York Times real estate section. And Bruce said, that's the place for us, just based on that picture. Never did we ever think of moving to New Hope. And so we came out and saw the house. It is the former Old Hope Antiques site. We loved the fact that it was a 1720s log cabin, and that part of the house is on top of it. On top of a 1860s frame house was built this new addition, which served as their showroom. So we loved the place, and we moved in December of 2000. Bruce wanted to be an antiques dealer. There's a storefront, and I wanted to be a writer. And that's about the time that we opened up Monkey Hill. And Monkey Hill was a wonderful adventure in retail and entrepreneurship. Bruce was the eye of Monkey Hill, and I supported him. We actually ended up opening our shop at ABC Carpet and Home in Manhattan. So we commuted into New York every day for about 3 years. Thereafter, we moved to Lambertville. We opened up Monkey Hill in between the 2 chapters of The Blue Raccoon. One of the most wonderful memories about having the shop in Lambertville was that Bruce and I started the Lambertville Pet Masquerade in 2005. We wanted to do it for those who were affected by Katrina and Rita, and it was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. We ended up having over 100 pet entries for the Pet Masquerade. The crowds were so huge that the Lambertville police, we could hear them say, "It's larger than the Peace March, we need backup now." It was a wonderful event, and we're pleased. I'm very happy that even after all these years, it continues to be a Lambertville tradition. Since living in New Hope, I've been afforded many opportunities to write. And one of my first writing assignments was with the New Hope Gazette. I'm sure many folks remember the Gazette, when Bridget Wingert was the editor before she founded the Bucks County Herald. And I was assigned some fascinating local stories. In fact, one of my memories is this article I wrote. The headline is "Magic Mushroom Setup Found in Soulberry." And I also wrote a story about a drug bust, also in New Hope. One particular memory was when the New Hope Borough Council, 2 people tied for the 4th position. It was Mr. Jake Fell, who actually, well, it was Mr. Jake Fell and Ray Velasco. They tied. And we all had to go to Doylestown, and they had to pick a ball, and whoever had the higher number was going to be on the council. So Jake Fell picked up a very high number, and unfortunately Ray picked a very low number, so Jake won. But apparently this was the second time that Mr. Fell had to pick a number, because the first time he lost to Jerry Delovich. One day Bruce and I were driving into Doylestown, and I saw this awning and sign for the writer's room of Bucks County, and I told him, "Stop." I went right in and I met Foster Winans, who ran the Bucks County group, and I got involved very early on. In fact, I became the first managing editor of the Bucks County Writer. It was a literary magazine, and we were able to produce 4 issues. We had a huge event, I remember, where a lot of luminaries in the literary world from around Bucks County attended it. It was a wonderful time to be amongst the community of writers. I even, at that time, joined a writers group, and one of the folks there was Mr. Damien McNichol, who a lot of you may know about. He was drafting his first novel, A Son Called Gabriel, and I feel very fortunate to have been part of that process before he became an established author. In rummaging through my past articles, I came across this one, which was actually in the Bucks County Explorer. It was a short-lived publication, but I wrote this literary lookout column, and I called it Bucks County is Book Country. And I want to just read an excerpt from it. I was exploring my first changing of colors as a Pennsylvania resident, and I'd come to realize I had found the book country in Bucks County. I moved here not realizing how rich its literary tradition is, as home and inspiration to some of America's most illustrious writers. And thank goodness for the James A. Michener Art Museum, which provides a crash course in a permanent exhibit. I am thankful for arriving on fertile ground that at one point was dubbed the Genius Belt and said to have literary vibrations. You can feel them everywhere. So recently I've tried my hand at stand-up storytelling, and the Bucks County Playhouse Theater in Lambertville had the word of mouth stage, and they would have a different theme every month. In January 2020, I decided to participate on the word of mouth stage. There were 10 storytellers, and at the end of the night, I surprisingly came in first place. I told the story of being a perfect Catholic boy growing up, but sometimes life gets in the way. And in 2004 or 2005, I was attending Mass at St. John's in Lambertville. It was Palm Sunday, I was running late. I run in, the priest and his entourage are still getting ready in the back. I grab a palm, I sit in the back pew. All of a sudden, this booming voice comes from above. The palms have not been blessed, return the palm now. And the whole congregation turned around, about 100 faces staring at me. I was so upset, I threw the palm back down and ran out of the church and never returned ever again. So that's the story I shared. And I look forward to the day when the word of mouth stage comes back and we can all do storytelling again together. I got to reprise my story in a few months, and this was during COVID, so this was done online. And it was just another opportunity to tell this wacky story about growing up Catholic and leaving the Catholic Church to a broader audience. I've found myself quite productive in 2021. This year, I have had the opportunity to write a number of op-eds for the Philadelphia Inquirer. The first one I wrote about was actually about leaving the Catholic Church, and this was when the church had a stance that it would not sanctify any same-sex marriages. And when I wrote that piece, lo and behold, little did I know that it would have such a strong response to it. The editor said that it's probably one of the most read op-eds they've ever had. So much so that different Catholic publications around the world did op-eds to my op-ed. Some of them saying how off the mark I was about the Catholic Church. But the other side of it was the positive response I received from so many people around the world who were experiencing the same feelings that I was at the time. The second op-ed I wrote about was during the attacks on Asian Americans because of the coronavirus, and I felt it was important for the Asian American community to come together to support each other, to ensure that we as a community stand firm and that we also value the diversity we have amongst ourselves, because we are not a monolith. We actually represent more than 30 different nationalities and ethnicities. The third op-ed I wrote was for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And the truth is that I myself had not really celebrated AAPI month, I kind of thought of it as kind of ho-hum. But a couple of years ago, my employer, ETS, asked me to tell the story of my own heritage. And I did talk about my grandparents who fought against the Japanese. They were in the guerrilla movement, and unfortunately, in the last days of the war, both my grandparents were executed by the Japanese. So I thought that was an important story to tell, and I do talk about how I did come to America, as did cousins of mine, my family, and that we've all have had the opportunity to thrive here. My most recent op-ed was when Carl Nassib, a pro football player, came out as gay. At this point, it shouldn't be so surprising. There have been many athletes, gay athletes, who have come out before him, but he is the first one who is active in a league. And so that is a big deal. And I thought that it also brings a lot of encouragement to gay youth to know that there are wonderful models out there for them. And so that's why I wrote about it. And my hope is to continue to write more op-eds. Flash, that is a new subgenre for both fiction and nonfiction. And what that means is that you can write a piece that is only 100 words, 250 words, or 750 words. And what I did this year was enter a competition on Flash Memoir that was up to 750 words. And I was fortunate enough to come in first place. And I enjoy the genre, and I think it makes writing more accessible to folks who don't feel, who are intimidated, shall we say, from having to write a story that's thousands and thousands of words long. As I mentioned, I completed my memoir called Boy Wander, and it is literally now being circulated amongst literary agents and potential editors. My hope is that it will be published one day. My hope is that it's the traditional route, which is an agent sells it to a publisher. But if that doesn't pan out, self-publishing is just as legitimate a route that more and more folks are taking on today. And it's something that any budding writer who would like to see their work published should consider, because a lot of it is a game of luck and also of connections and timing. An agent needs to really fall in love with your work, and then the agent needs to persuade the editor that they love it as well. So in today's world, both routes are viable and available to everyone. On the activism and volunteering front, I became active during the last presidential election cycle. I was a big supporter of Mayor Pete. I held a fundraiser in my home. I became a congressional district PA1 delegate candidate for him until he dropped out. I got to write about it in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I am also a member of HRC Bucks, supporting equality for members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I am supporting their political action committee. I also volunteer as a board member of the Acme Screening Room in Lambertville, New Jersey. This is an art cinema venue. We show independent films on the weekends. We also have carpool cinemas and online offerings. I've also very much enjoyed being part of New Hope Celebrates parade every May, whether it's with my church, St. Philip's Episcopal, or as part of the Acme Screening Room. And I very much look forward to the day when we can all celebrate again outdoors. I've been quite fortunate to have my global marketing career. After Claro, I've also worked in the oil and gas sector. And most recently, these past 7 years, I've been heading up marketing for ETS. And I'm glad to have it because it supports my writing habit. I, in a way, have come full circle because I myself was once an international student that took the TOEFL test in order to get into an American university. And this time around, I get to support the study abroad dreams of other students around the world. One of my roles at ETS is also as an executive sponsor for the LGBTQ+, what we call the Business Resource Group. And this ensures that this community has a voice in the policies and programming that happens at ETS. I am definitely finding more time for my writing and reading. I hope to write more op-ed pieces, write more short stories, continue to work on more memoir pieces, and who knows what the future holds. Maybe even try my hand at a novel. If you'd like to write, my first piece of advice is to read. Read what you want to write about, and read about the art of writing. I have several favorite books in writing. One of them is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but I love the way she approaches the craft of writing. I also enjoy this book written by Brenda Ueland. She actually wrote it back in the 1930s, but the advice for writers is invaluable and still relevant even after all those years. And surprisingly, I am not a Stephen King reader necessarily. I've watched Carrie, but his book called On Writing has wonderful advice. It's very straightforward, and I think you'll enjoy it too. There are periodicals, magazines on writing, and there are two that I subscribe to if you'd like to learn more about the industry itself. One of them is called Poets and Writers, and you can see I have a lot of markers here because there are a lot of things I'd like to follow up on. The other one is Writer's Digest, also a wonderful resource on the entire publishing industry, as well as advice for writing itself. I also suggest that you look for writing classes. There are several being offered, whether it's continuing education or straightforward writing classes at say a community college or nearby college. The other thing you can do is join a writers group. I joined a writers group. It's called Il Chiostro. A friend of mine, Michael, here in Bucks County, runs it, and it's a wonderful way to be part of a safe community of writers and an expert instructor that can really guide you through your pieces. Writing is a personal pursuit. I think it's important that you write for yourself first before writing for others. If you're into journaling, I think it's a wonderful way of recapping how your day went, what went right, what went wrong. As long as you write, that's what matters. So if you do want to pursue writing, just start out with whatever interests you, and at the very least, know that it's for yourself, and that in and of itself is quite gratifying. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for listening and for allowing me to share my journey from all the way from the other side of the world to here in New Hope, and to hear about how I became a writer and I'm inspired to continue writing. The other thing I'd like to say is just how lucky are we who live here in New Hope and Bucks County. I could not have asked for a better place to end up. In fact, I have now been here longer than anywhere else I've lived my entire lifetime. I have found a wonderful set of friends that love and support me, and I hope to meet many more folks in the community as I continue to live here. Who knows, I might even die here. So my final word to you is continue to enjoy what moves you, what you're passionate about. If writing is it, I'm happy to talk more about it with you. That's really it. So thank you again, and I'm really glad to have been part of this. Thank you, New Hope Celebrates.